Hi, welcome back to In Too Deep, a podcast with me, Alyssa. In this podcast, we go a little too deep into everything feminism, from pseudoscientific beauty myths to the misogyny that seems to always be a part of them. As you may have noticed, I've been away for a while. I said in my last episode that I was going to try and keep making episodes during my uni semester. I just started a master's degree. Yeah, that didn't happen. Because riddle me why, that was literally the busiest I've ever been in my life. I tried, but it was just not possible. I think I finished 2 weeks ago my exams, but why did I have a month and a half of exam period? What are we doing? That was actually torturous. Anyway, I'm back post almost stress-induced heart attack, but I'm free now. And I'm hoping to make some episodes from now until March next year, before I'm thrown back into the ringer. I'm scared. In the last episode, I had a poll up to decide what we were going to do in this episode. And I won't lie, talking about the romanticy epidemic won, but I didn't want to do that because I didn't want to make myself depressed immediately upon starting this podcast again, because don't even get me started on dark romanticy. It's so scary and it would be scary to study and research for, so I didn't want to do it. So we're doing the second choice, which was beauty pseudoscience, basically just myths, misinformation, and lies that are spread by the beauty industry or influencers, and they all have this undercurrent of scientific illiteracy and misogyny and capitalism. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. I won't lie, this might be a bit of a disjointed episode because I'm just talking about random shit, but I've been thinking about this episode for a few months now, but obviously never had time to actually produce it because I was so busy. But I did make a few TikToks talking about it in the past few months, which were met with some interesting responses. But that actually helped me in focusing, or kind of realizing what I needed to focus on this episode. To be honest, will be a bit convoluted, and to be honest, it's also a bit more of a rant or self-indulgent episode just because these things have been pissing me off so much. But there's also a little bit, not even a little bit, they all have an undercurrent of misogyny underneath them, which is to be expected when we're talking about the beauty industry, which is misogynistic in and of itself, but there's even more misogyny in there, and we're going to get into it. Also, if you're watching the video version of this and you're like, girl, this is the worst lighting I've ever seen in my life, yeah, the sun just doesn't come out in Melbourne, apparently. Never had this problem in Perth. It was just always sunny, and I could just always film an episode in the sun. But it's been raining for 2 weeks straight. So also riddle me why it's November and it's still cold. No, because what do you mean by that? That's actually not funny. I digress. The connections between the concept of beauty and misogyny are very obvious, along with capitalism as well. Again, very obvious in the needing of selling products to consumers. But I'm more interested in how all of these concepts connect alongside the recent scientific illiteracy we've been seeing, inaccuracies surrounding cosmetic ingredients and usage has been going on for decades, of course. But the questioning of the safety of these products in the year 2025, when we're obviously at our scientific peak knowledge as a global population, yet simultaneously we're reverting to questioning science and rejecting science that actually has a real basis. That's worrying to me. As someone who has and is currently studying some part of medical sciences, I'm not becoming a doctor, so don't take all of my words as 100%, but it genuinely shocks me when people who probably failed high school biology are coming online and making claims about the efficacy of certain ingredients or the safety of products, about how the science is lying to you and all of this stuff. And it's like, did you even like understand the article you were reading? Personally, at least, the more I learn, and especially in starting this degree, because it's like kind of more broad knowledge, the more I learn, the less I know, because like it literally just keeps going. Like you start learning things and then you realize all of the things that you don't know. And that's someone who's been studying it for like a few years. Like I'm not really that amazing at science, but there's still a lot of background knowledge there. And even I would not like feel that comfortable going online and like giving people advice about vaccines because, for example, vaccines, because I'm not like a medical professional. So why do these people who have literally no knowledge about anything at all come online and be like, guys, it's the vaccine's killing you? So now where did you get that from? I've spoken about the concept of anti-science, which was very obviously seen like an uptick in 2020 for unknown reasons. And it's definitely paved the way, that anti-vax stance, for a rejection in science in other domains, particularly cosmetics. Though I will argue like the move to like clean cosmetics has been happening for like decades. It's not, just a COVID-induced thing. But definitely recently, you would have seen a lot of like movements and TikToks online telling people to reject like very basic knowledge that we know to be true about things, like sunscreen, for example, which we will get into more later. But more specifically, I've spoken about how a rejection of science amongst women is somewhat understandable. Obviously, with the history of medical misogyny and all of these other things, it's understandable for women to be somewhat skeptical of science. Like scientific research has never really put women at the forefront, and it's only in recent times that we've been included in studies at all. However, yes, I understand it, and especially when we're talking about things related to menstruation and a lot of other conditions which are literally just like not treated very well at all, like just telling everyone to get on birth control. I get the skepticism. However, this is showing up in some really damaging takes that have become popular among women, such as the concept of misandry or feminine energy or the need for natural beauty products. I made a post about how it was not necessarily a good thing that the European Union recently banned TPO, or trimethylbenzoyl diphenyl phosphine oxide, in nail products. I had a few comments echoing this sentiment that, well, if the beauty industry is evil, then anything that goes against the beauty industry is necessarily a positive thing. I don't agree with that at all. I even had one of my mutuals comment that like how my priorities were out of order, if I was worried about nail polish and not sabotaging systems of oppression. What the hell, sure. So I feel like this video is explaining why I am worried about these sorts of things, like the outrage around, oh my god, TPO is going to give you reproductive cancers or whatever the fuck. So I'll talk about TPO in depth later, but basically what I wanted to do with this episode is establish why things like this are important, and not everything that goes against the beauty industry is a positive thing. The disbelief in science in every sector, every part, even when it comes to something that goes against like negative beauty ideas against women, like about women, rejecting the factual scientific basis is never positive. We should be able to find ways to critique these things without becoming like Donald Trump level of scientific non-believers, right? In an article titled Women and Their Hair Seeking Power Through Resistance and Accommodation, published in 2001 in a journal titled Gender and Society, the author writes, "The body is an especially important site for power struggles between men and women. For millennia, women's subordinate position has been justified by an ideology that labeled their bodies and brains as inferior and has been reinforced by a unique set of disciplinary practices aimed at creating a submissive and feminine body. In turn, the centrality of women's subordination has put the body at the center of explicitly political struggles to improve women's status, such as the battles to gain reproductive rights and to end violence against women." Basically, what I think is important about that quote, and we'll come back to this article later as well when we're talking about hair products, is that the preconceived ideas about the differences between men's and women's bodies are used against us. And these are like non-scientific ideas about how women need to be feminine and how that's some biological basis to that. And that's why I think it's important that feminist movements do not reject actual science and instead fall for the same ideas that people like on the far right, who don't believe in climate change, are using against us. So that kind of forms the basis of why I think it's important that feminist movements do not reject science. In this episode, I will mainly be referencing the book by Dr. Michelle Wong titled The Science of Beauty. Michelle has a PhD in chemistry and post-scientific education content under the name Lab Muffin Beauty Science. I have that book behind me if you're watching the video version. And I think it's really important to find science communicators who are able to, one, put the words of scientific articles, which can be difficult for the general population to understand, into more digestible content, but also educators who don't mischaracterize that research in doing so and misinform people. So she's one of my favorite creators in this area, so that's why I wanted to reference her in this video. In terms of the history of beauty products, and especially the history of like clean beauty or skepticism around beauty ingredients, it would be difficult to trace back the history of human expressions of beauty in itself, because it's almost concurrent with the existence of humans in general. However, throughout all that time, there were elements of oppression against women even before capitalism came into the picture. That would obviously be way too large of a topic, so there's definitely a lot of things that I'm not going to be discussing here because it's just crazy big, but the beauty industry is something that we can put a timeline to. And I think it's also where gender, science, and business all collide. So as expected, the Industrial Revolution is really what allowed beauty to become an industry in the first place around the late 19th century. The ability of mass production alongside developing knowledge about chemistry allowed for the production of mostly cosmetic products like lipsticks, eyeshadows, very basic things. At this time, there was a definite lack of knowledge about safety and perhaps like a lack of ability of even understanding how to test for this safety as well, with products containing lead, asbestos, and arsenic available on the market early on, mostly in America and in similar countries as well. The existence of a market, though, meant that cosmetics became available for anyone to use, not just the wealthy or actresses or prostitutes. This only became more widespread with marketing and Hollywood film. This mass marketing of beauty products through film and eventually TV, print advertisement, and the availability of products in places like department stores. Through this, like, entrepreneurs were able to take advantage of the increasing desire for cosmetic products, but companies also had to start competing against each other. This is a big component of the scientific misinformation we see spread by companies themselves in order to compete against each other, with taglines such as like 100% natural or paraben and sulfate free, to try and sell cleaner cosmetics to their customers. Mina Lay, who I'm sure you've heard of, a YouTuber, goes further into the history of clean consumerism in her 2023 video, Deadly Cosmetic Myths and the Lies of Clean Beauty Marketing, noting that this lean to clean beauty started with an increased awareness of environmentalism. Around the 1970s, some groups like hippies and black feminists, among others, turned away from cosmetics altogether, which only led to companies co-opting that image of like natural, no cosmetic look, and advertising their products as natural, environmentally friendly, environmentally inspired, and clean beauty. But if you were worried about the ingredients in skincare or makeup in like 1920, I wouldn't blame you. As I said, they contained like asbestos and lead. I don't think you want either of those on your face. This was also before the onset of mandatory product testing, or rather before toxicological testing was even known about as much or understood or able to be carried out on a large scale. In 1938, the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act was enacted in the US, which allowed the FDA to regulate the safety of food, drugs, cosmetics, and other medical devices. This actually didn't get updated until 2022 to become more modernized, and it's difficult to like actually understand what this first act even did, because it basically just said like things needed to be safe, but it didn't really like apply that many restrictions or requirements for mandatory testing. In 2022, the FDA was allowed to force mandatory recalls of any potentially dangerous products. The EU has even more robust testing requirements under the 2009 cosmetics regulation, requiring physical, chemical, and microbiological testing, preservative efficacy testing, and stability testing before a product can be allowed on shelves. Companies which sell in both the EU and the US obviously would have to do all of these EU testing anyway, and I'm fairly certain the testing requirements in Australia are quite similar to the EU. So after we've gone through that brief history of products and product testing, I'm going to be discussing some common myths surrounding hair, skin, and nail products, the likely ingredients or components of these complaints, and the misogynistic principles which often undermine them. So starting with hair. Hair is obviously heavily gendered in our choice of how we allow it to grow in the human body. Of course, I have the fairly expected opinion on body hair, but in terms of beauty products, I want to discuss scalp hair. Though beauty standards for both women and men surrounding hair can be different globally, there tends to be a trend of women having long hair and men having short hair, obviously. Most sociology and historical research on the topic will have you believe these expectations are entirely evolutionary, and in terms of historic societies, I would agree. In an article from early this year titled Evolution of Long Scalp Hair in Humans, the authors note that the ability to grow long scalp hair is a distinct human characteristic. It probably originally evolved to aid in cooling the sun-exposed head, although the genetic determinants of long hair are largely unknown. Long scalp hair in humans was also a trait that was selected because it conveyed essential signals related to an individual's age, sexual maturity, health, and social status. This is in line with how most features of attractiveness in women are associated with youth, which was perhaps important when the human life expectancy was like 40, but I don't know if it's really important anymore. Nowadays, I would argue it's impossible to study like human attractiveness and the natural evolutionary patterns behind that without taking into account the socialization and expectations that impact this. Obviously, hair is important in how women are perceived, and it's not just about length. Standards around texture, color, and style all alter how a woman is treated in terms of attractiveness, traditional customs, professionalism, and even everyday interactions. In her 2001 article, which I've already mentioned, Women and Their Hair, sociologist Rose White interviewed 44 women of diverse backgrounds in Arizona in order to explore how women seek power through resisting and accommodating mainstream norms for female hair and the strengths and limitations of these strategies. She notes that no matter what a woman does or doesn't do with her hair, dyeing or not dyeing, curling or not curling, covering with a bandana or leaving uncovered, her hair will affect how others respond to her, and her power will increase or decrease accordingly. Consequently, women use their hair to improve their position because they recognize that not doing so can imperil their position. Of course, the power and any other gains achieved through hair or other aspects of appearance are circumscribed, fragile, bittersweet, and limiting. As expected, through her interviews and further research, she writes that the most common way women use their hair to seek power is through strategies that de-emphasize resistance and instead emphasize accommodation to mainstream ideas about attractiveness. But what of those women for whom it's more difficult to accommodate to these mainstream expectations? The ideal beauty standard in most of the Western world is that of typically straight, long, oftentimes blonde hair, and this is unachievable for most of the population. Black women specifically are othered by their own natural hair. In an article from 2009 titled Black Women, Beauty and Hair as a Matter of Being, published in Women's Studies, the author writes, more so than ever, Black women are bombarded with images that have normalized long straight hair. Undoubtedly, the image of Black beauty in popular Black magazines gives the impression that Black hair is only beautiful when it is altered. Black women continue this practice because a real woman has long straight hair, while short hair is relegated to something children have or those women, according to mainstream and Black beauty standards, who may be deemed less attractive. What effect does a valorized, inauthentic aesthetic have on a Black woman's conceptualization of her physical attractiveness and sexuality? This white expectation of hair isn't just limited to a frivolous concept of beauty. It leaks into how professional a woman is seen and how she is treated in her everyday life. This oppressive force of how we present our hair is, of course, taken advantage of by the beauty industry in order to sell products. But there's so many lies that come along with this as well. I want to discuss some ingredient myths around hair loss, hair texture, and reducing oily hair. In terms of hair growth lies, I think I've probably fallen for every hair growth lie that has ever been lied, because I think I've lost probably like 95% of my hair in the last 5 years, mainly due to stress and also probably like iron deficiency. But the cosmetics industry would have me believe that there are miracle scalp oils that could fix that issue immediately if I just paid $50 plus shipping. And it never worked. In an article from May this year titled Preconceived Ideas in Hair Care, it showed that the majority of participants believed certain myths about hair growth, with 84% agreeing that castor oil promotes hair growth, and over 70% of participants agreeing that garlic or onions promoted hair growth. None of these treatments have any scientific backing at all, of course. As Michelle Wong notes in her book, the only actual real treatments that can increase hair growth are minoxidil, finasteride, and dutasteride. The last two only really being helpful for like male pattern baldness, so wouldn't help me. And the one downside to all of these, but mainly minoxidil, is that they need to be used continuously or they stop working. So it's kind of like a lifelong commitment if you want to use any of these. While it's true, the expectation for women to have long, thick hair is damaging, and thus treatments to increase hair growth are just an indicator of how far women feel the need to go to reach this standard. Hair loss can actually be an indicator of a medical condition. Wong writes, severe emotional or physical stress can cause a large proportion of hair strands to enter telogen, aka the rest phase where hair follicles can be shed, in unison. Common causes include childbirth, severe illness, thyroid disorders, chronic diseases, iron deficiency, and certain medications. So it's kind of worrying for women to like assume that they just need like a little product, some like rosemary oil, to grow their hair again, when it could be a sign of an actual medical condition. For me, at least, I think it's mostly genetic. But yeah, the stress definitely isn't helping. Another really common area of misconception has to do with hair washing, particularly shampoos, how often you should use them, if at all, or whether they contain sulfates and parabens. Guys, everything is sulfate free and paraben free these days, and I just want my sulfates back. I just want my sulfates back. One thing I always took issue with was the concept of hair training, or not washing your scalp for a long time to train it to produce less oil. Quick question, would you ever stop washing your armpits to make them sweat less? No? So then why would you do that on your scalp? Like, can we think about things for a second? And what's really funny as well is that most like hair professionals, like if you go to literally most hairdressers and you're like, my hair's so oily, they're like, oh, you just have to oil train. I'm like, I'm literally gonna shoot up your hairdresser. Like, I'm sorry, but like, don't piss me off. Wong notes that while it's true to some extent, some rare cases of people may just be washing their hair like way too often. And so if you stopped washing as often, your hair would be the same amount of oily. But there's no evidence for a biological feedback loop that tells sebaceous glands to slow down when there's more sebum present. Sebum production is largely controlled by hormones and genetics. As such, how often someone needs to wash their hair before it gets oily literally just changes person to person based on how much your scalp produces sebum based on your genetics. Like, if you are one of those people who doesn't wash your hair like more than once a week, first of all, you're kind of grossing me out. And second of all, that's like not a safe thing to do. Many people like refuse to wash their hair as often as they should be, allowing it to get really oily and like other things to build up on their scalp because of preconceived ideas about the dangers of overusing shampoo, which often circles back to, again, increased hair loss from shampoo use. What you're actually risking from not washing your hair often enough is irritation, inflammation, dysbiosis of the microbial environment, which can lead to yeast overgrowth and dandruff, and actual damage to the hair follicles that can actually cause hair loss. Not a great list of side effects. The only danger associated with washing your hair more often is the fact that it's more delicate when wet, so you could like have more breakage. Wong recommends that it's best to wash your hair as often as you want to remove buildup and minimize irritation. And if you're someone who naturally produces less sebum, stop telling women who need to wash their hair every second day to oil train. Like, I will actually blow up your house. Like, nothing pisses me off more. Moving on. Probably the biggest fear-mongering and lack of scientific literacy around hair products comes back to parabens and sulfates. And one quick Google search will show you thousands of companies who are telling you how evil parabens and sulfates are and to buy their paraben and sulfate-free product instead. Who's surprised? For example, one of the first articles that came up when I searched up like sulfate free or sulfate bad or something, it was by this Australian skincare brand, Yours Only, titled Why Parabens and Sulfates Are Bad For You. In this article, they confirm, with no references, mind you, that sulfates, a type of cleaning surfactant, cause cancer, destroy hair follicles, and leave residue on your heart, lungs, and brain, and cause blindness. Like, excuse me? Excuse me? It's not doing any of those things. While for parabens, a family of preservatives, apparently they cause breast tumors and have estrogenic activity linked to reproductive issues. The brand also kind of gives you the idea that they don't use preservatives at all, which I really hope isn't true because all of their products contain E. coli right now. If that's the case, like, that's worrying. With brands like this, it's entirely used as a selling point. And I don't mean to call out like this random brand that just came up when I googled sulfate bad, but there's a million others like this. But then having a quick look at one of their cleansers shows that it contains 5 surfactants and at least 3 preservatives, aka necessary compounds for shampoo. Like, hello. Sulfates and parabens are, simply put, not an issue in products apart from like a very small amount of people who might have allergies to them. Wong discusses parabens in her book, noting that they have been widely used for about a century due to their safety, low allergenicity, and effectiveness. She also addresses the claim about the estrogenic activity of parabens, which unfortunately for brands that want to lie to you, she says studies have repeatedly found that parabens are thousands to millions of times weaker than natural estrogen. Therefore, any estrogenic activity isn't going to do anything, actually. Similarly, the claim about it ending up in breast tumor was based on a 2004 study, but as Wong notes, the levels were not compared to non-cancerous breast tissue, and some of the parabens seem to have been introduced during the study. So that's really reliable. One a commonly occurring thing that seems to turn up when we're talking about fear mongering around cosmetic ingredients is the reproductive effects. And I think this is common among other forms of like medical misogyny as well. People only care about the negative impacts of things when they are going to impact a woman's ability to have children, which most of the time has no robust research behind it anyway. But it's interesting that it only matters how something's going to impact a woman if it's going to impact if she has a reproductive ability or not, which tends to back up the idea that a woman's health only matters insofar as she can still have a child, because that's a woman's role, as we know. In terms of sulfates, the misconception may have to do with the fact that sodium lauryl sulfate could potentially be more drying than other surfactants. But this isn't even necessarily the case with finished products. It's potentially the case with the ingredient itself. The other common sulfate, sodium lauryl sulfate, doesn't even have this potential effect. So if you really had any worries, you could just swap to SLES instead of SLS. SLES is often much less stripping and much more effective than other surfactants as well, meaning you could get away with washing your hair less often with still maintaining the same amount of cleanliness on your scalp. Because of the fear-mongering around these ingredients, they often get replaced with less effective alternatives that can have even worse health risks, such as less effective preservatives, which would give your products less of a shelf life because they can't necessarily be protective against microbial growth for as long of a time period as like a family of parabens may be able to do. And this can also lead to some product recalls of products that were not preserved effectively and microbes were allowed to grow. When it comes to skin, there are a million misogynistic expectations for how women need to present themselves, of course, stemming from the need to create a perfect image of ourselves for the intangible commodity that being attractive brings women. Of course, there's a million things I could discuss about the misogyny of beauty products related to skin, like anti-aging products, cosmetic surgery, makeup, and I will go into them a little bit. But in terms of scientific illiteracy, the lies around sunscreen is by far the biggest issue. There's even a Wikipedia page for the recent rise in the so-called anti-sunscreen movement on TikTok, and it's been active like for the past few years, which is kind of lining up with the event that occurred in 2020. Interesting. In terms of anti-aging, the expectation for women to somehow combat a compulsory part of having a human body, i.e. growing older, and especially the formation of wrinkles, literally doesn't make sense. Michelle Wong writes, "Wrinkles are an inevitable part of growing older. Changes in the dermis in combination with repeated movements are the main cause of deep wrinkles. Collagen, which gives the skin much of its strength, decreases from the age of 30. Interestingly enough, though, one of the only real ways to prevent premature aging and early wrinkle formation is by using sunscreen and limiting sun exposure, which has many more benefits than just reducing wrinkle production. Many women do have premature skin changes that are quite problematic, and this often comes from tanning in the teens and 20s. Obviously, this is associated with the quite American beauty ideal of tanned skin, which also extends to most other Western countries for women with paler skin. If you look at the type of people who post anti-sunscreen content, it's mostly white women who are probably partially prioritizing tanned skin over health, alongside the fact that they have really bad scientific illiteracy, but it's definitely associated with the beauty standard as well. Most of the posts that come up when you search something along the line of anti-sunscreen or hashtag no sunscreen are young women bragging about the fact that they don't use sunscreen and they still look really good for their age. Meanwhile, the age is usually like 35 maximum. I'd say this is again associated with the idea of tan skin being deemed as more healthy looking, more youthful, and also probably a part of the fact that paler skin is sometimes associated with like sickliness. I was just thinking as well, like people comment on how pale I am literally all the time. And first of all, like maybe I want to look like a vampire. Did you ever consider that? And secondly, this is literally just the color of my skin. Like, Wait, because why would I be changing the color of my skin? Like, like when I actually think about it, I'm like, why are people commenting on the color of my skin? Like, why? What other color would it be? That's just the color it is. Especially when we know that any amount of skin color change as a result of sun exposure is not even potentially, but 100% increasing your risk of skin cancer. Like, why am I being asked why I'm so pale when it's just like, I don't know, like I don't want skin cancer? Like, what is this question? But it's also just indicative of how sunscreen has such a cosmetic basis to it as well. Depending on cultural expectations of where you live, changing of your natural skin color might be expected, which is obviously evident in the expectation to tan during summer as a pale Australian woman. That's very, very expected. Or the expectation to not get any sun exposure at all and to stay as light as possible, which is really common in countries like South Korea and a lot of Southeast Asian countries as well. And it's also sometimes combined with other cosmetic products like skin bleaching. Thankfully, it seems a little more difficult for brands to lie to consumers about sunscreens because they're considered a therapeutic good in most cases, and also probably because of the amount of risks associated with sun exposure and the health impacts associated with improper use, that it's like almost impossible to lie about this unless you're like an influencer who has no safety concerns for their products. In Australia, especially, sunscreens must meet several regulatory requirements and standards to legally be supplied in the country. This is definitely a step in the right direction because of the robust research behind sunscreen use, and it would be great if this could be extended to other, potentially less important, but other misinformed products nonetheless. Even if the market itself can't promote anti-sunscreen ideas, as I mentioned, this doesn't stop influencers from doing it. And oftentimes it's in a way that they're getting money indirectly from doing this, which once again ties these skincare myths back to capitalism as expected. Similar to the vaccines causing autism and parabens causing breast cancer myths, the spread of anti-sunscreen beliefs can also be partially traced back to an either misinterpreted or poorly researched report. In an article published by Columbia University in late 2024, they note that a few reports released in recent years showed the presence of sunscreen chemicals that could be absorbed into the bloodstream. This research was mischaracterized by many influencers and used to fuel this whole anti-sunscreen movement and the many myths associated with sunscreen, such as sunscreen being toxic, sunscreen actually causing cancer as opposed to the sun, sunscreen causing vitamin D deficiency, or that people with darker skin cannot get skin cancer, so sunscreen is not required for them. I will say it's probably quite a small amount of really stupid people who believe that the sun doesn't cause cancer. Skin cancer is unique because it's probably one of the most easily understood and preventable cancer. I think over 80% of skin cancers are caused by sun exposure, at least in privileged countries with access to sunscreen and usually the ability to stay inside under high UV conditions. Skin cancer is highly preventable. To put it very simply, the UV wavelength alters DNA. And I'm not going to go any deeper into this because it's not even that important. Very basically, the UV alters DNA. And this effect occurs in all DNA from every living thing because every living thing requires DNA to live, basically. So it's not just humans who are getting skin cancer from sun exposure, but it also has to do with the fact that we don't have fur anymore. This is also why in microbiology labs, some areas can be sterilized or sanitized with UV light. It'll kill bacteria because it degrades their DNA too much for them to continue living. Now, if you apply that same principle to human beings, we're made up of a lot of cells, obviously, not just the one, like bacteria, but it is possible that there's a UV-caused DNA mutation in one cell that gives rise to skin cancer that kills you. That's entirely possible. As such, any exposure to UV rays is carcinogenic. It's very simple to understand, right? So the expectation for anyone to willingly overexpose themselves to high UV to change the color of their skin is majorly worrying, like when you put it like that. Like my poor DNA, like my poor DNA. I also think sunscreen myths are commonly reshared by that same genre of like non-GMO health nut influencer who also probably puts beef tallow on their face, which, just very quickly, don't put beef tallow on your face. I don't even think I need to explain that. Just don't do it. Which again is like an area of the internet which is most popular among women, which is again worrying. Probably one of the only semi-valid takes about sunscreen would be the lack of vitamin D absorption. In an ABC radio report by Cara Jensen McKinnon, she discusses the anti-SPF movement on TikTok. Dr. Michelle Wong also featured on this, and Dr. Cara McDonald, a dermatologist as well. When discussing the vitamin D concerns, Wong said, from the research, it looks like unless you are extremely diligent at wearing sunscreen and protecting your skin from the sun other ways, it's very, very unlikely that wearing sunscreen is preventing you from getting enough vitamin D. And this makes sense because to liberally cover your entire body with sunscreen or protect the skin from the sun in other ways, to the point that it's giving you like 100% protection from like the activation of vitamin D, it's like, wow, you're really good at wearing sunscreen if that's actually what's happening. However, vitamin D should honestly already be taken by most people who live in areas where the UV is not commonly high. And what I mean by that is like taken orally if you're able to in these areas. Recently I got a blood test and the doctor was like surprised that my vitamin D wasn't low because I'd just gone through a Melbourne winter and this would normally render most Melburnians deficient in vitamin D. I take oral supplements, especially in winter, but also because as a vegan, my only source of vitamin D is the sun. And simultaneously, I don't want skin cancer. So it's like, I'm just going to take it orally. Do you know what I mean? In most Australian cities, the UV is so high that in summer you can limit the amount of time you're in the sun to like 10 minutes and still be getting adequate vitamin D while using sunscreen. Dr. Cara McDonald noted as well in this report that the capitalistic basis behind the influencers making these claims, mentioning how most of the time these TikTokers are making outrageous claims just for popularity. Interestingly, when discussing the public health repercussions of these sunscreen myths, she jumps straight to young women who tan in their teens and 20s, like I mentioned, and how this shows up dermatologically with skin changes and obviously an increased risk of cancer. I think at least if you're Australian, you're less likely to fall for anti-sunscreen myths because like every single adult I know has had like melanoma cut out of their skin. So it would be really crazy if you were living in Australia seeing everyone get skin cancer around you and you're like, and I'm going to use beef tallow in place of sunscreen. It's interesting though that like even a therapeutic good can be a victim of this scientific misinformation. And like can be incorporated into the cosmetic industry as well. If you've seen recently, a lot of the like spray sunscreens for like face application when you're wearing makeup, none of those are really effective enough to actually give enough protection from the sun. But the reason they're so heavily promoted is because people don't want to give up their ability to wear makeup and also be in the sun, which again relates back to the misogynistic beauty ideals where we're putting wearing makeup over getting skin cancer. What the hell, sure. Moving on to the last topic I want to talk about, which I already mentioned at the start of this episode as well, the banning of TPO in the European Union. I want to preface by saying that I do genuinely believe that nail art is something that can totally be reclaimed as artistic, like under patriarchy and under gender ideas, rather than just like an enforced beauty thing. I mean, I've definitely seen a lot of tweets from other women who are saying how like women who don't, you know, pay to get their nails done every week and like constantly have like beautiful nails are like gross and like ugly and unhygienic. Genuinely, I've seen many tweets like that, which is not the view I want to take on this. But personally, doing nail art is like my only artistic hobby. Don't look at my nails right now because exam period anxiety did render like half of the skin on my hand being like scratched off. because I was so stressed. So ignore that. But like, I like making up little themes and designing each nail, and because I've also never had like another artistic hobby that I was able to stick to, so I think it's fun and cute, and I think it can totally be an okay thing to do that's not like complying with like beauty expectations of women. Like for my graduation from my microbiology degree, I did like petri dish bacterial growth nails, which was fun. And when I saw Charlie XCX, I did a like, please become friends with Rina Sawayama and drop ugly Maddie Healy inspired nail set. So, you know, it can be fun. Anyway, what I do think is most important about creative makeup or nails or whatever else is not feeling dysphoric or feeling normal, whether you have like nail art or whether you have makeup on or not. But that's probably like the most important thing about it if you want to engage in these things. So what I want to talk about mainly is the TPO ban, but importantly, there are some real risks associated with nail products. However, once again, many companies lie about these risks either in a positive or negative way to sell products. So TPO was banned following the adoption of Commission Regulation 2025/877, disallowing the compound from the 1st of September this year. I don't want to conclude here that I don't like trust the EU's regulations. They are a lot better than many other places in the world, but they tend to do a lot of blanket bans on things even when the research isn't super robust, because it's more of a hazard management based regulation system other than, you know, like how much of each amount is safe or whatever else. Basically, if a product gets defined as potentially carcinogenic, mutagenic, or reprotoxic, CMR, in almost any amount, it gets automatically banned. The amount that causes these potential negative impacts, though, isn't always taken into account. And this is really important to consider because realistically, the overconsumption of any chemical compound, any food, anything will kill you. So like, I don't know what the saying is, like the amount makes the poison or whatever, but really that is the most important part here. In terms of EU compound bans, an exemption can be applied for, and in that case, the amount or percentage that can be included in products safely will be calculated. But for the TPO ban, no one submitted a derogation request, which might be because there are a lot of alternatives to TPO that can be used, so it's just kind of like, whatever, the companies will just swap to something else. The study that classified TPO as a CMR toxicant was a rat study, which first of all, free the rats. Like, do we need to be doing like extreme studies on rats? I just don't think it's necessary. Like, I could assume that if I ate a lot of TPO, it would kill me. Don't need to do a study of it, to be honest. Basically, this 2020 study found that male rats had testicular shrinkage after consuming high amounts of TPO for 28 to 90 days. Some problems with this study: I'm not a rat, and I'm also not orally consuming TPO. So where's the correlation? However, this did not stop a lot of fear-mongering, again, from people who did not have the scientific literacy to be able to find this article, because I literally couldn't find the research or understand it. I will say though, in this case, again, the research was hard to find. And if you were to take the EU ban at face value, just reading that this is a potentially reprotoxic compound, then you would assume that it's potentially reprotoxic. Do you know what I mean? Like, you wouldn't assume that it was like a weird, let's overfeed rats TPO study. This is an issue, again, not because of the misinformation solely, but also because it gives other companies the ability to promote their TPO-free products. Therefore, it doesn't really go against the beauty industry at all, but rather just redirects the clientele to different brands. Oftentimes as well, these like TPO-free polishes are way more expensive. Of course, in reality, humans do not consume TPO at all, actually, but there's also a very low exposure to it in nail products. TPO is among a few commonly used photo initiators, basically meaning that it kicks off a chain reaction of polymerization when exposed to a specific wavelength, and then causes the hardening of these like small little monomers into polymers, which shows the gel hardened on your nails that you see. As such, the only time you're exposed to the TPO itself is the brief time where it's on your nails and hasn't yet been hardened. And it almost immediately will turn into something else, which is unable to penetrate your skin or nails. TPO itself is also already unable to penetrate nails, so it's only even an issue if you're quite sloppy with your application and get it on your fingers. TPO is also used and hasn't been banned from dental applications like fillings and other things, but in these cases the exposure would be even lower. It's also being done by a medical professional, aka a dentist, so the risk is like even more low there, even though from doing nail products the TPO risk is extremely low already. Even if you were to get it on your skin, the reprotoxic effects that were studied were so minimal in male rats that consumed very high amounts. This also comes back to the idea that suddenly the negative risks of certain products only matter if they could maybe stop women from having children. And again, to clarify, like parabens, TPO does not do that. Unless you were to like start consuming like ample amounts of TPO daily for like a month, then yeah, maybe it would have some negative effects. But actually, the main concern of using nail gel is not TPO at all. It's the small monomers that I mentioned called acrylates, which link together with the help of TPO to form polymers and then form that like hardened gel on your nails. These monomers, before they've hardened, can be irritating and are also a strong allergen. If you're regularly getting nail gel on skin, you can develop an allergy against them. And again, this is an issue because acrylates are widely used, present in a lot of different products, and probably most importantly in dental work as well. And if you become allergic to acrylates, this will cause a lot of issues using different things. It's very interesting to me that there was such a misinformed outrage over the usage of TPO and how it has these supposed reprotoxic effects, but not the real issue associated with nail gel, that is acrylate allergy. Even if brands start selling like TPO-free products, lulling consumers into a false sense of safety, which could see them like being less, like specific or less safe when applying the products because they think they don't contain TPO, so there's no other potential risks, when realistically these products will be just as dangerous because they contain acrylates, which are the main concern when it comes to nail gel. Even HEMA-free polishes, which don't include the HEMA acrylate, aka hydroxyethyl methacrylate, which is a common allergen, could still cause allergy because they have to contain other acrylates in order to work as a gel product. As such, any of these products contain risks, and that's also why I think it's like, you should probably minimize your exposure to them, and if you're not sure about doing them yourself and not getting it all over your skin, maybe go to an actual nail artist or just like skip the gel nails altogether. That's basically all I have to talk about in terms of myths in this episode. I know it was maybe a bit disjointed, but basically what I wanted to conclude with is that anything that goes against the beauty industry is not necessarily good. I talked only about a few examples in this episode, a few of the more like well-known ones, but you can see how supposedly harmless scientific misinformation can lead into things that cause serious health impacts. And these impacts are most often against women because we are the targets of the beauty industry as consumers. From developing dandruff because you tried to oil train your hair and accidentally overgrew heaps of yeast, to getting melanoma when you stop believing in sunscreen. This can be like really dangerous stuff if you fall down this like anti-science pipeline when it comes to beauty products. And interestingly enough as well, you don't have to be a person who's really skeptical of beauty products, because a lot of these ideas about like things like sulfates are not even just spread in anti-science spaces, but are just spread from like, they're almost normalized knowledge at this point, and they're all like lies or misinformation or mischaracterized research. As I've said, I think it's a really good example of how misogyny, capitalism, and pseudoscience all intertwine, and how important it is for feminist movements to reject all of these things really and not just take things at face value. One other thing I wanted to bring up is the misogyny in science communication and the fact that for female science communicators, a lot of the time they have to take into account how they look in order to be taken seriously by listeners. This isn't usually an issue that men have to face. Like for women, they have to make sure they look presentable, not just in like a hygienic or professional manner, but in the sense of having to wear makeup and having to look good for the camera in order to ensure that potential listeners won't just like swipe past their post because they think they're ugly. Michelle Wong actually discussed this in one of her recent videos and how she's had comments from quite a few people saying they couldn't watch her videos because they didn't like that she didn't wear mascara, which is like insane when she's probably one of the only like well-known science communicators who like consistently posts research-backed content. I think that also contributes to the type of influencers who are given a platform, even if they have no scientific background. You know, if they're able to be well versed in social media and able to promote their posts, it doesn't matter if they're telling the truth or not. I mean, even for me making like feminist content, sometimes I'm like, well, you know, I still have to like make myself look presentable for the video, even though like I know my audience probably wouldn't care about that. So there's some food for thought for you. That's all I have to talk about in this video. Once again, I know it was a bit of a random one, but it's something that I've been meaning to talk about for a while. The next episode, we'll see if I can force myself to look into dark romantasy, but like, it's seriously a dark place and I'm scared, so we'll see. Thank you guys so much for listening anyway. I hope you enjoyed and I hope you have a good week that is filled with an appropriate amount of UV and sunscreen usage and washing your hair. Bye!